my guests are Lisa Cherry, right here, and her daughter, Kalyn Cherry Waller.
Nightmare discovery that our daughter was involved with a 46-year-old man from our congregation.
As you go along, living with one foot in heaven, breaking the enemy's power. In the strength of Jesus, we can stand in the darkest hour. Living with one foot in heaven, ready when He calls our name. For believers to live this Christ, to die is only gain.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today my guests are Lisa Cherry, right here, and her daughter, Kalyn Cherry Waller. Welcome.
It is so good to be here.
Yes,
Good to meet
thank
you.
you for having us.
Of course. Well, they have written a book called Unmask the Predators, The Battle to Protect Your Child. Now, the reason that you wrote this book was because of what happened to your daughter.
Yes.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, when Kalyn was 15 years old, we were utterly shocked when one day we found an $800 cell phone bill. Now, that was back several years ago. The only person in our family who had a cell phone was my husband. And so we immediately thought this must be a crazy billing error. But that was the tip of the iceberg of a nightmare discovery that our daughter was involved with a 46-year-old man from our congregation. And it totally blew our lives apart. When this came to the light, the girl that we knew in the past disappeared, and one that we had never seen before came in her place. It was a terrible case of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse then often causes other problems. So we had rebellion and different kinds of depression, eating disorders, cutting, all those things you never want to have in your house.
Wow. I really applaud you, Kalyn, for being willing to sit here while we talk about what happened to you. Is that difficult for you?
You know, it's not the most comfortable thing to talk about. It's not a comfortable topic to address, really. But we have just decided to be transparent with our story and to realize it's not about me, it's not about our family. It really is about what God did in our lives and the hope that He wants to bring to other people who've experienced similar pain.
And also to warn parents,
Exactly.
especially, and pastors
Absolutely.
of what can happen.
Right.
Yes.
Make
Right
them
under
aware.
your nose.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You were active in the church.
Yes.
And-
My husband pastors the church, and so we were right there as a pioneering ministry family.
And
Kids
you were
right
in the music.
involved.
You were doing
Yes.
I was
music.
very involved
Yes.
in all the different areas, children's ministry, music, helping with anything that I could as a young teen.
Yeah.
And so we had always protected our kids, did not really believe that something like this could happen. I think one of the most vulnerable things we can do in today's world is just assume that it could never happen to us, and so we don't become informed. This problem called sexual abuse is very rampant in America today.
One of the things that surprised me when I read the book was that I didn't realize that sexual abuse doesn't even have to involve any
Physical consummation of the problem. I didn't either, and that's what caused us months of delay of getting any appropriate help. You see, sexual abuse is any kind of interaction, whether that's visual, whether that's talking, whether that's even in pictures, and of course the physical act of sexual activity that crosses over relationship boundary lines. And it's between an adult or an older teen and a child or a teenager. So in my mind, what happened to Kalyn was mostly through phone and internet interaction. There was some limited physical contact, but when we found it, we said, well, we are so grateful. You know, we were probably very close because he was soliciting her very hard and trying to get her to meet him and go places. But we thought, well, we found it in time, not realizing that the same kind of soul damages, anytime those pressures come on a young life, can be very devastating. And that happens to so many teenagers today.
Since you're mentioning that, do you think it's possible that teens can suffer that same kind of problem, the same kind of symptoms that you, Kalyn, went through, even with it, if it's with others who are close to their age?
You know, that has really caused me to relook, as we have told our story the last few years and talked to just thousands of parents and teenagers. sexual wounds coming on young lives, God never intended it that way. He did not package us to receive that. And so when children or adolescents are violated or violate that purity, that can be through different kinds of media exposure. Pornography will produce some of the same side effects, and we've seen that with a lot of kids, that something kind of comes inside them. And then, in Kalyn's case, she identified with it. We know our children are trying to find themselves. They're trying to say, who am I, and who did God make me to be? When you begin to believe you're dirty, you're used, you're not pure, we give girls a sexual purity ring, and then they want to take it off or hide it because they say, this thing happened to me. As a teenager, they then can begin to act out of that wound. And it's very serious in our culture.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of teens are doing what they call sexting.
Yes.
And,
yes. Virtual, it was shocking to us to realize that particularly in a child and adolescent, that world is just as real to them. And so in adult minds, we say, oh, well, it was just talking. But no, a child and adolescent, it's real, it crosses the boundaries, and once it does, then they have to have the healing of the Lord and the programming of their mind to come back out.
Okay, well, how did the Lord heal you?
Well, it wasn't overnight. We tell our story of hope. This happened now 10 years ago, and it wasn't an immediate thing, but God did heal me. He restored my life. It was 8 months from the time that my parents found out about through the cell phone bill, that there was a problem. It was 8 months before I even told them what had really transpired, what had really happened, what had been said. And at that point, I was able to face the truth, and that's kind of what we see as the first just glimmer of hope that came, because before that it had just been so dark and so hopeless that we didn't know how we were going to get out of the mess. But it was another 2.5 years after that of kind of, I would make some progress, and we would seem to have a little bit of healing in our relationship, and then we'd fall back and back and forth. But during that time, I really know that God was staying faithful to His Word, and He was working in my spirit and beginning to soften and beginning to get into those places that had been damaged and hurt and broken on the inside of me. When I was just 17 and a half, I had graduated high school, and I went to a program called the Honor Academy with Teen Mania Ministries. And it was while I was there that God really got a hold of my life. And I had an experience with God in a worship service, a prayer and fasting retreat that we were seeking God for our lives. And I felt God speak to my heart that I had to wake up, and I had to face what had happened to me, and that if I didn't turn from the rebellion that I then had chosen after I had this wound, I had chosen a lot of rebellion and had built further walls in the relationships in my home, that if I didn't turn from that, I was going to die and lose my life. And it scared me. As a 17-year-old, I wasn't sure what that meant, but I knew that I was at a dead end of going my own way, of trying to just say, I don't need to deal with this, I can just go on with my life. And so it was at that point that I really let God in, and I said, God, I want you to take all of me, and I want you to clean out the mess that happened to me, but also the mess that I've now created these last 3 years of destructive behavior. And I remember calling my parents from the ministry base I was at and saying, God has gotten a hold of my life, and I've been a prodigal. Can I come home? And that was a glorious day that we look back on, and just
amazing,
just with so much joy. To realize that day started the true healing and the true restoration, not just with the wounds that I had had in my own life, but with my family. I had been so close to my father, and I'd been his little girl always, and then I had been pushing him away now for so long, and just the precious relationship that began to be rebuilt between my dad and me, my mom and me, and the Lord and me. God began to take me to a place I had never been, and able to read the Bible and understand what it meant and let it change me. So it was just a sweet time that began of rebuilding and just kind of cleaning out all the garbage.
That's wonderful. One of the things that you talk about in the book is these predators they'll do it gradually.
Yes.
They build up a kind of a loyalty. The reason you turned on your parents was because somehow you believed that loved this man,
Right.
he loved you, and nothing mattered
Yes.
more than that. And he had done that by a slow conditioning process, hadn't he?
Yes, we call that grooming is really what it's called from law enforcement. We didn't understand that process, but it basically is where a predator will desensitize over a period of time, not just the victim that they're aiming at, but the people around. So that could be the parents or the church body around, to trust them, so that if you see kind of what things could be small warning signs of their behavior, you just dismiss it and say, oh no, that's so-and-so, I'm sure that everything's fine. And we know that that's really what happened in our situation, that my parents were groomed in that sense, but I was also groomed that I remember I would go and tell my mom things. If someone else had said something inappropriate to me, there's a couple times that happened as a young teen, I'd go and tell my mom and say, what do I do? But this man didn't start off being inappropriate with me. He started off just commenting that I was such a good helper at the church, and it was good to be on the worship team with me. That's how it started, until by the time it turned to be something that I said, oh my goodness, where's that coming from? It was too late, in that I felt like I couldn't say anything. I was trapped, and he was telling me, don't tell anyone, we have a secret relationship. And so I didn't see any way out as a teenager. I didn't know what to do.
Well, how can parents kind of be on the lookout for this?
Yes, and I think one of the things we're doing right now is one of the most important things. I did not understand that you can't just tell a child, if someone acts inappropriate, come and get me. That seems logical to the adult mind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I remember telling Kalyn the stranger danger talks, and I kind of visioned someone with a trench coat, somebody that looks the part.
Right.
Because this is so subtle, learning about this issue of grooming, reading some stories, reading as you read it and you see it in operation, you realize there were a lot of points in there where the trust relationship caused us to not react like we should have, or like we normally would have. And that then becomes an awareness. So keeping a mental watch list to say, I do not believe that everyone is going to hurt my children. We still have a lot of children at home. You can't get paranoid. Fear is not a good response.
Right.
But keeping alert to say we have so many people that have been damaged themselves, that in our case we were dealing with a situational offender, someone who wasn't like we see maybe the pedophiles that have hundreds of victims. He was a person that was very confused in his own life, broken, had some places where he was going down to a lower level to deal with getting success in his mind. Knowing that profile, I can now look around and say, okay, he was a man that was potentially a problem. But you cannot pinpoint people. That's what's so terrible, is that you can't say, well, I'm sure Uncle so-and-so would be fine. Instead, we watch, we listen, we watch our children's behavior. She was giving us warning signs. She was changing when he entered a room.
Oh.
And in subtle ways. I thought she had a crush on the older son in his family. And, that seemed reasonable to my mind, but I didn't recognize that often you will see some children will withdraw from that person. Some just begin to talk about him a lot. In other words, see that relationship or that interest, she didn't have it in her heart that there was anything wrong with that. But now when I hear any adult gaining that place with my children's life, not that you don't want adults in your kids' lives, but you're watchful over those relationships to say, is there anything here that should be further assessed? Does that kind of answer the question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that you pointed out to me when we were talking beforehand is this can happen in a homeschool family where you homeschooled. And your pastor's family.
I mean, we were the people helping people.
Right.
And so of course, that took me years to be able to handle the guilt of it, to say, why did I not know? And I look back on that and say, what was going on there that I would not have known? And I really caution people with pride. I really thought we had done everything. Now, this issue of sexual abuse, I dismissed it in my mind, meaning that, we had our kids in a protected environment, not realizing that things can get sneaky on the inside. Yeah. And I remember when probably the worst memory I have of a time when she was coming out of the garage, because remember this is through mostly a cell phone where he was talking her through virtual acts of sexuality for sometimes hours at a time. I caught her one time coming out of the garage, and I stopped her, and I didn't know why she was coming out of the garage, but she looked funny to me. Her dress subtly changed. She just seemed more sensual.
Right.
Well, I guess so.
Yeah.
So I saw her that day, and you know what my first thought was? Well, you need to change what you're wearing. You need to straighten up. And it's still a painful memory to me, because there were subtle signs in her behavior that she was struggling. And you know what, as a mom, I didn't want to see it. It wasn't the picture that I wanted the world to see. I didn't want to see it. So there was a little subtle form of denial. I've met some moms that have had problems with their teenagers. Maybe it wasn't a predator like a person. But right now we're living in an oversexed culture. 2/3 of our young people are living together before marriage.
Yeah.
And the church statistics are not that different. So our kids are being bombarded with sexual messages. And even in homeschool families, how did I think we were insulated? We went to Walmart, I mean, even though we were watching the media, you go through Walmart and you're going through a sex ed line, just to get your groceries paid for. So what do? We do need to realize that we're vulnerable, but we are not alone. We can learn, and that's part of the reason of the book. We wrote a lot of things in there, things we do a little differently now.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, I want to know where people can find you online.
We have a website called frontlinefamilies.org. And through that website, we write to moms. I write a blog to moms to equip them in these kind of things, and we have different resources for families on there. And love to connect with people and see if we could pray with them and be of help.
That's good. Well, I thank you both for being my guests. I wish we had more time to talk, because this is such an important issue.
Yes.
And I applaud you for going ahead and sharing your pain and also your victory through Christ.
Yes.
So thank you for doing that.
Thank
and for
you.
being on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good to be here.
For believers to live.